Marriage is supposed to be built on trust. It's a promise, a foundation you rely on when life gets hard. That's what I believed when I married Rachel 10 years ago. She was everything I thought I wanted: charming, intelligent, and ambitious. Little did I know, beneath that perfect exterior was a woman capable of tearing my entire life apart. It started subtly, with little cracks in our relationship that I dismissed as the pressures of life. We argued more often, mostly about money. Rachel was never satisfied with our lifestyle. She wanted more: a bigger house, nicer cars, designer clothes. My job as a contractor paid well, but it wasn't enough to keep up with her insatiable appetite for luxury. Still, I loved her. I worked harder, took on extra projects, and even skipped vacations to keep her happy. I thought I was doing the right thing, sacrificing for the woman I loved. I didn't see what was coming. The day everything unraveled started like any other. I was leaving a client meeting when two police officers approached me in the parking lot. "Mr. Jameson," one of them asked, his expression serious. "Yes," I replied, confused. "You're under arrest," he said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. I froze, my mind racing. Arrest? For what? This has to be some kind of mistake. But they didn't answer. They read me my rights, cuffed me, and escorted me to their squad car. My co-workers and clients watched in stunned silence as I was driven away like a common criminal. At the station, they told me I was being charged with fraud and embezzlement. According to the police, Rachel had reported me, claiming I had been siphoning money from our joint accounts and hiding assets. I laughed bitterly when they explained. "That's insane. I haven't stolen a dime," but the evidence they presented said otherwise. Bank statements, forged documents, even fake emails, all pointing to me as the culprit. My heart sank as the reality of the situation hit me. Someone had set me up, and there was only one person who had access to all those accounts: Rachel. The interrogation was grueling. The detective didn't believe a word I said, convinced I was some kind of criminal mastermind. "You're looking at serious time, Mr. Jameson," he said, leaning across the table. "Why don't you save yourself and come clean?" "There's nothing to come clean about," I snapped. "I've been framed." "By who?" he asked, his tone mocking. "Your wife." "Yes," I said, my voice firm. He laughed. "Why would your wife do that?" I didn't have an answer. I didn't know why Rachel had done this to me. All I knew was that the woman I thought I could trust had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I was denied bail, thanks to the evidence Rachel had provided, and spent the next several weeks in a cell waiting for my trial. Those weeks were the longest of my life. Sitting in that cold, gray cell, I had nothing but time to think. I thought about the years I had spent with Rachel, the sacrifices I had made, and the love I had poured into our marriage. It was all a lie. I couldn't call her, couldn't confront her. My lawyer tried to reach out, but she refused to speak to him. She had built a wall around herself, and there was no way for me to break through. Eventually, my trial date arrived. By some miracle, my lawyer managed to uncover a key piece of evidence: a recording from a bank security camera showing Rachel forging my signature on one of the incriminating documents. The case against me fell apart, and the charges were dropped. But the damage was already done. I had lost my job, my reputation was in shambles, and my savings were drained from legal fees. My so-called friends avoided me, whispering behind my back about how lucky I was to get off on a technicality. And Rachel? She had disappeared. She cleaned out our accounts and vanished without a trace. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a mix of relief and rage. I was a free man, but my life was in ruins. And as I stood there on the courthouse steps, one thought burned in my mind. Rachel wasn't going to get away with this. When I walked out of the courthouse a free man, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let Rachel get away with what she had done. The betrayal had cut too deep. She hadn't just ruined our marriage. She had systematically destroyed my reputation, my career, and my life. And for what? Money? Revenge? I had spent years working tirelessly to provide for her, to give her the life she wanted, and this was how she repaid me. She left me humiliated and penniless, sitting in a cold jail cell while she ran off with everything I had worked for. As I stood on those courthouse steps, I made a vow to myself. I would find her, and when I did, she would pay. The first few weeks after my release were a blur of frustration and dead ends. Rachel had done a disturbingly good job of covering her tracks. The house we had shared was empty, and her phone number had been disconnected. She hadn't contacted any of our mutual friends, and her social media accounts had been deleted. At first, I didn't even know where to start. My savings were gone, and without a job, I couldn't afford a private investigator. But sitting around and waiting for answers wasn't an option. I started by digging through what little I had left. Rachel might have been cunning, but she wasn't perfect. People like her always left breadcrumbs. I went through old emails, financial records, and even her favorite online shopping accounts. It didn't take long to find something promising. A receipt for a luxury hotel, dated the day after I was arrested. The hotel was an upscale place on the other side of town, far from where we had lived. When I arrived, I felt out of place in my worn-out clothes and unshaven face. The receptionist eyed me warily as I approached the desk. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone professional but cold. "I'm looking for someone who might have stayed here recently," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Her name is Rachel Jameson." She frowned. "I'm sorry, but we can't give out guest information." I expected that response, but I wasn't leaving empty-handed. "Look, I'm not trying to cause trouble," I said, lowering my voice. "She's my wife, and I think she might be in danger. Please, I just need to know if she was here." The receptionist hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Finally, she leaned in slightly and whispered, "She checked out 2 weeks ago." That's all I can tell you. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm that Rachel had been there. And if she had been staying at a place like this, she wasn't exactly hiding. She was living well, on my dime. I left the hotel with a renewed sense of determination. Rachel might have disappeared, but she wasn't invincible. She was bound to slip up sooner or later. I decided to follow the money. Rachel had cleaned out our accounts, but she couldn't have spent it all yet. And if she was staying in luxury hotels, she was probably using credit cards. I reached out to my lawyer, who helped me get access to our shared financial records. Sure enough, there were charges on a new credit card Rachel had opened in her name, expensive dinners, spa visits, and designer shopping sprees. But one charge stood out: a rental car agency in a small town about 200 miles away. I drove through the night, fueled by equal parts rage and adrenaline. The thought of Rachel living the high life while I struggled to pick up the pieces of my shattered life was enough to keep me going. When I arrived in the small town, it was early morning. The rental car agency wasn't open yet, so I parked nearby and waited. The hours crawled by, but I was determined to get answers. Finally, the office opened, and I walked in. The clerk behind the counter greeted me with a polite smile. "Hi, I'm looking for some information about a rental car," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "My wife rented a car from here recently, and I'm trying to track her down. She left in a hurry, and I'm worried about her." The clerk seemed hesitant, but eventually nodded. "What's her name?" "Rachel Jameson," I said, holding my breath. He typed her name into the computer and frowned. "She returned the car a few days ago, but she left a forwarding address." My heart raced as he handed me a piece of paper with the address scribbled on it. Rachel had slipped up. The address led me to a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house was modest but well kept, a far cry from the luxury lifestyle Rachel had always craved. As I sat in my car, staring at the front door, I wondered what I would find inside. Was she alone? Had she already moved on with someone else? I didn't wait long to find out. Summoning every ounce of courage, I walked up to the door and knocked. When Rachel opened it, her face went pale. For a moment, she looked like she had seen a ghost. "David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Surprised to see me?" I asked, my tone cold. She stepped outside, glancing around nervously. "You shouldn't be here." "No, Rachel," I said, stepping closer. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be anywhere but a jail cell after what you did to me." Her expression hardened. "I didn't have a choice," she said defensively. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," I said, crossing my arms. Rachel launched into a series of excuses, claiming she had been desperate, that she felt trapped in our marriage, that she had done what she thought was best for herself. "You ruined my life, Rachel," I said, my voice rising. "You had me arrested, humiliated, and left me with nothing. For what? Money? Freedom? I never wanted it to go that far," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "I didn't think they'd actually arrest you." Her tears only fueled my anger. "Spare me the fake remorse," I snapped. "You knew exactly what you were doing." I wanted to lash out, to scream at her, to make her feel the pain she had caused me. But I knew that wasn't enough. Rachel had to face real consequences, not just for what she had done to me, but for the lies and the crimes she had committed. As I stared at her, a plan began to form in my mind. She thought she had won. She thought she had gotten away with everything. But she was wrong. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you let the law handle it? Or would you take matters into your own hands? Rachel stood in front of me, still trying to justify the unforgivable. Her excuses, her half-hearted apologies, they only fueled the storm of rage boiling inside me. She thought this was just a conversation, an airing of grievances. But I had no intention of walking away without a plan. You didn't mean for it to go that far? I said, my voice steady despite the fury I felt. You call the cops on your husband, accuse him of crimes he didn't commit, and you didn't think it would go that far? What exactly was your plan, Rachel? Did you even have one? Or were you just improvising as you destroyed my life? She flinched at my words, but quickly recovered. You don't understand, David. I needed a way out. I was suffocating in that marriage. You didn't give me what I needed. What you needed? I repeated, incredulous. I worked myself to the bone for you. I gave you everything you ever asked for, and it still wasn't enough. Her expression hardened. Maybe that's the problem. You thought throwing money at me was enough, but it wasn't. I wanted more. I shook my head, disgusted. And your solution was to frame me for embezzlement? To have me arrested, humiliated, and stripped of everything I've worked for? You could have just left, Rachel. I couldn't, she shot back. I had to make sure I'd be okay. I had to think about myself for once. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. Rachel didn't care about what she had done to me. She only cared about herself. But if she thought she had won, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I didn't lash out at Rachel. I didn't scream or threaten her. Instead, I played the part of the defeated man, the husband who had been wronged but couldn't bring himself to fight back. You know what, Rachel? I said after a long pause. You're right. Maybe I didn't give you what you needed. Maybe I should have seen this coming. She blinked, clearly surprised by my tone. David, Save it, I interrupted, holding up a hand. I didn't come here to rehash the past. I just wanted to see you, to understand why you did what you did. Now I know. She tilted her head, suspicion flickering in her eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done, I said, my voice calm. You've taken everything from me. There's nothing left for me to fight for. Rachel's shoulders relaxed, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely at ease. I'm glad you understand, she said softly. But she didn't understand. Not yet. Over the next few days, I began putting my plan into motion. Rachel thought I was walking away, but I was doing the opposite. I was watching her, studying her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her habits were easy to figure out. She had a new routine, a morning jog, a trip to the spa, an afternoon spent shopping at high-end stores. She was living comfortably, basking in the luxury she had stolen from me. But her biggest mistake was underestimating me. Through careful observation, I discovered Rachel had a partner in crime, someone who had helped her forge the documents that led to my arrest. His name was Eric, a sleazy lawyer who specialized in shady financial deals. I tracked Eric down to his downtown office, a dingy little place that screamed barely legal. He was the kind of man who thought he was untouchable, but I knew better. One afternoon, I paid him a visit. Can I help you? He asked as I stepped into his office. You don't recognize me, do you? I said, closing the door behind me. He frowned, his eyes narrowing. Should I? I leaned against the desk, locking eyes with him. I'm David Jameson. You helped my wife frame me for embezzlement. His face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb, Eric, I said, my voice low and threatening. I've got enough evidence to bury you. Forged documents, altered bank records. Sound familiar? He swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. What do you want? I want Rachel, I said simply. And you're going to help me bring her down. Eric tried to protest, claiming he had no idea what Rachel had done with the money she stole. But after a little persuasion, a veiled threat here, a reminder of his own culpability there, he agreed to cooperate. He handed over a flash drive containing all the records he had kept from their scheme, emails, financial transactions, and most importantly, proof that Rachel had laundered the stolen money through an offshore account. It was exactly what I needed to take her down. With Eric's help, I devised a plan to corner Rachel. I knew she was smart, but her arrogance made her sloppy. She thought she had tied up all the loose ends, but the flash drive in my possession said otherwise. I waited until she was at her most vulnerable, alone, with no one to shield her from the consequences of her actions. The opportunity came one evening when I saw her at a high-end restaurant, sipping wine and laughing with friends. She looked radiant, carefree, as if she hadn't just ruined my life. I waited until she stepped outside for a smoke, then approached her. David, she said, startled. What are you doing here? I thought we should talk, I said, keeping my tone neutral. She crossed her arms, her guard immediately going up. About what? About this, I said, holding up the flash drive. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw a genuine fear. What is that? It's everything, Rachel, I said, stepping closer. Every document you forged, every transaction you made, every lie you told. It's all here. She laughed nervously, trying to mask her panic. You don't have anything on me, don't I? I said, tilting my head. Let's find out what the authorities think. Her smile vanished, replaced by a mask of fury. You wouldn't dare? Try me, I said, my voice cold. I didn't wait for Rachel to respond. I walked away, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. But this wasn't over. Not yet. I wasn't interested in justice. I wanted revenge, and Rachel was about to learn what it felt like to have everything ripped away. Rachel wasn't the type to crumble easily. I knew that about her, and I expected her to fight back. She had spent years perfecting the art of manipulation, and if cornered, she would do anything to save herself. But this time, she had underestimated me. I didn't just want to expose her crimes. I wanted her to feel the humiliation, the isolation, and the betrayal she had forced on me. This wasn't about simply getting justice. It was about making her suffer in the way I had suffered. With the evidence Eric had provided, I set my plan into motion. The first move was simple: cut her off financially. Rachel had been living off the stolen money, but she didn't know that I now had access to her offshore account. With Eric's help, I froze the funds and set up alerts for any attempts to withdraw. The first time she tried to use her card, and it was declined, I knew it wouldn't take long for her to notice something was wrong. Sure enough, 2 days later, I received a frantic call from an unknown number. David, what did you do? Rachel's voice was sharp, her usual composure slipping. I have no idea what you're talking about, I said coolly. My accounts are frozen, she snapped. I can't access my money. Did you do this? I smiled to myself. Did you think I was going to let you live the high life after what you did to me? You bastard, she hissed. Do you know what you've done? I need that money. That's funny, I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Because I needed my freedom, my reputation, and my career. But you didn't seem to care about that. You're going to regret this, she said through gritted teeth. No, Rachel, I said, my voice firm. The only person who's going to regret anything is you. I hung up before she could respond, the satisfaction of her panic fueling me to move on to the next phase of my plan. The next move was a bit riskier, but far more satisfying. I compiled a detailed dossier of Rachel's crimes, complete with screenshots of the forged documents, financial records, and emails from Eric. Then I sent it anonymously to everyone who mattered in her life. Her friends, her colleagues, even her family. It wasn't just about exposing her. It was about making sure she couldn't talk her way out of this. The truth was undeniable, laid bare in black and white for everyone to see. The fallout was immediate. Rachel's friends started distancing themselves. Her social media accounts were flooded with angry messages, and rumors about her began to spread like wildfire. One evening, I received a call from her sister, Jessica. David, what's going on? She asked, her voice laced with confusion. I got this email about Rachel. Is it true? Every word, I said bluntly. Jessica sighed. I knew she could be selfish, but this is unbelievable. Believe it, I said. She framed me for a crime I didn't commit, stole everything I had, and left me to rot. I'm just returning the favor. Jessica didn't argue. She simply said, she needs help, David. But I can't blame you for what you're doing. With Rachel's social circle turning against her and her financial resources cut off, I knew it was only a matter of time before she hit rock bottom. But I wasn't finished yet. I scheduled a meeting with the police, armed with a flash drive and a carefully prepared statement. While Rachel had managed to avoid legal consequences before, this time, she wouldn't be so lucky. It took less than a week for the investigation to gain traction. The evidence was overwhelming, and with Eric's testimony backing it up, the case against Rachel was airtight. The day they arrested her was one I'll never forget. I got the call from one of the detectives I'd spoken to earlier. We've taken Rachel Jameson into custody, he said. The evidence you provided was enough to issue a warrant. She's being charged with forgery, fraud, and obstruction of justice. I hung up the phone, a mixture of relief and triumph washing over me. Rachel had destroyed my life, but now she was facing the consequences of her actions. A few days after her arrest, I decided to visit her in jail. I wanted to see her one last time, not out of sympathy, but to make sure she understood that I was the one who had brought her down. When I walked into the visitation room, Rachel was already sitting at the table, her face pale and her eyes filled with exhaustion. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. Well, look who decided to show up, she said bitterly. Come to gloat. Something like that, I said, taking a seat across from her. Her hands trembled as she spoke. You've ruined me, David. I lost everything. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. No, Rachel. You ruined yourself. All I did was make sure everyone saw the truth. She glared at me, her eyes burning with hatred. You think this makes you the better person? You're just as vindictive as I am. Maybe I am, I admitted. But the difference is, I didn't betray the person I swore to love and protect. I didn't destroy someone's life for my own selfish gain. Her shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. For the first time, she looked truly defeated. What happens now? She asked quietly. You answer for what you've done, I said, standing up. And I move on with my life. Rachel was eventually sentenced to several years in prison. The stolen money was seized, though it wasn't enough to undo the financial damage she had caused me. As for me, life didn't magically improve after her arrest. My reputation was still tarnished, my career was in ruins, and rebuilding felt like an impossible task. But at least I had closure. I had taken back some control, but the scars of Rachel's betrayal would never fully heal. She had left me broken in ways I didn't know were possible, and no amount of revenge could change that. What would you have done in my position? Was the revenge worth it? Or should I have walked away and started fresh? Let me know your thoughts, Dot. Revenge is supposed to be satisfying. That's what I told myself as I walked out of the visitation room at the jail. Rachel was finally paying the price for everything she'd done to me. I had stripped her of the money she stole, exposed her to the people she had manipulated, and handed her over to the authorities. By every metric, I had won, but as I drove back to my empty apartment, the thrill of victory was nowhere to be found. The silence that greeted me when I opened the door was deafening. No children's laughter, no shared dinners, no plans for the future. Just a hollow, aching void where my life used to be. Rachel's sentencing made headlines in our town, turning her into the cautionary tale people whispered about over coffee. Did you hear what she did to her husband? They'd say, shaking their heads in disbelief. But as much as people pitied me, their sympathy didn't fix my problems. My reputation was still in tatters. The rumors that had spread after my arrest didn't vanish overnight, and many people still viewed me with suspicion. Finding work was nearly impossible. Every job interview ended the same way. Polite smiles fading into awkward silence as they mentioned background checks or company image. I could see it in their eyes. They didn't trust me. Rachel's lies had left a stain I couldn't wash away. I ended up taking odd jobs, manual labor, handyman work, anything to keep a roof over my head. It was grueling, thankless work, but it was all I could do. The part that hurt the most was losing touch with my kids. Rachel had never wanted children, but I had insisted, convinced that becoming parents would strengthen our marriage. Now, they were collateral damage in a war they didn't understand. After Rachel's arrest, her parents stepped in to care for them. Her father was a stern but kind man, and her mother doted on the kids like they were her world. I knew they were in good hands, but it didn't make the distance any easier. Visitation was complicated. Every time I saw my son and daughter, they would ask questions I didn't know how to answer. Why can't mommy come home? My son asked one day, his wide eyes filled with confusion. She made some bad choices, I said carefully. Do you still love her? My daughter asked, her voice small and hesitant. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. I love the memories of when things were good, I finally said. But sometimes love isn't enough. They didn't fully understand, and I didn't expect them to. How could they, when I barely understood it myself? Even with Rachel behind bars, she was still a presence in my life. Every time I drove by the places we used to go, our favorite restaurant, the park where we'd taken the kids, the house we had shared, I felt the weight of her betrayal all over again. I thought about her more than I cared to admit, not with love or longing, but with a mixture of anger and sadness. She had been my partner, my confidant, the person I thought I could trust above all else. And yet, she had destroyed me without a second thought. Occasionally, I'd receive letters from her. The first one arrived a month after her sentencing, a plain envelope with her name scrawled on the return address. I'm sorry, the letter began, for everything. I know you'll never forgive me, but I need you to know that I regret what I did. Not because of the consequences, but because of the pain I caused you and the kids. I didn't respond. What was the point? No amount of apologies could undo the damage. Over time, I began to question whether my revenge had been worth it. Yes, I had exposed Rachel for who she truly was. Yes, I had ensured she faced justice for her crimes. But in the process, I had lost myself. The anger and bitterness that had driven me to take her down had consumed me, leaving little room for anything else. I had spent so much time focused on making her pay that I hadn't considered what came after. What comes after revenge? The truth was I didn't know. Years passed, and the wounds Rachel had left began to scab over. though they never fully healed. I eventually found steady work in another town, far from the people who knew my story. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was something. I started going to therapy, hoping to untangle the mess of emotions I carried with me. The therapist, a kind but no-nonsense woman named Carol, didn't let me off the hook easily. "Do you regret what you did to Rachel?" she asked one day. I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "No," I said honestly. "She deserved it." Carol nodded. "And do you think holding on to that anger is helping you move forward?" Her question lingered in my mind long after the session ended. One day, I received a letter informing me that Rachel was up for parole. The thought of her walking free sent a chill down my spine. What would she do? Where would she go? Would she try to re-enter my life? Or would she disappear for good? I decided not to attend the parole hearing. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was done with her. But deep down, I knew the truth. Part of me would always be tied to Rachel, no matter how much I wanted to let go. A few months after Rachel's release, I received one last letter from her. "David," it began. "I don't expect you to read this, but I need to write it anyway. What I did to you was unforgivable, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. I don't blame you for what you did to me. I deserved every bit of it. I'm leaving town, starting over somewhere far away. I hope you can do the same. I hope you can find peace. Goodbye, Rachel." I stared at the letter for a long time before folding it and placing it in a drawer. It didn't bring closure, not really, but it was an ending of sorts. In the end, there were no winners. Rachel lost her freedom, her family, and the life she had built on lies. I lost my trust, my marriage, and a piece of myself I would never get back. Revenge had given me a sense of control, but it hadn't healed the wounds. If anything, it had deepened them, leaving me with scars I would carry for the rest of my life. Some betrayals cut too deep to recover from, and some stories don't have happy endings. What would you do if someone you loved betrayed you so completely? Would you take revenge, or would you try to move on? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for following this journey. Until next time.